When Matteo discovered that I wouldn't be inheriting any of my father's wealth, his reaction was explosive and immediate. "You mean you get nothing?" he yelled. "Then you're of no use to me. I want a divorce right away." Following our separation, I devised a plan to get back at both my husband and my sister, who surprisingly, quickly married each other after our breakup. I'm Riley, and I am a 27-year-old administrative officer. Matteo and I had been married for 4 years. We met through a family friend who thought marrying into my somewhat affluent family would be beneficial for Matteo. Despite my family's wealth, the concern of who would inherit it was prominent since I and my sister were the only heirs. After my mother's death, my father, Matteo, and I lived together in my parents' house. Matteo seemed genuinely caring towards my father, which made everyone believe he was a good match for me. However, before our wedding, the relative who introduced us gave me a concerning heads-up. "It might seem strange since I introduced Matteo, but he's quite fixated on money, so be cautious." At that point, it was too late to back out, as we were already legally bound and the ceremony was imminent. Initially, I didn't perceive any obsession with money in Matteo's behavior, so I proceeded with the marriage, albeit vigilantly because of what I had been told. While he didn't overtly show a greed for money, his casual inquiries about my father's finances during their conversations hinted at his underlying interest. Another area of unexpected interest for Matteo was my younger sister, who is 5 years my junior. Unlike me, she is vibrant and extroverted, enjoying a lively social life. The stark contrast between her dynamic presence and my more reserved nature caught Matteo's attention from the start. "Your sister really has a different vibe from you, doesn't she, Riley?" he commented once, clearly intrigued by her. This difference between my sister and me stirred mixed emotions within me. Although my family friend had been concerned about my prospects of marriage due to my modest appearance, thinking that the family legacy might be safer with my more attractive sister, the true depth of their worries only became clear to me later on. My father was always more indulgent with my sister, allowing her to pursue her education far beyond high school. After earning her college degree, she wasn't ready to jump into the workforce and decided to attend a vocational school, even though she didn't have a clear career objective in mind. She just seemed to prefer studying over working. On the other hand, my mother was much stricter. She insisted that my sister should start working immediately after college. However, my father had the final say and supported her decision to continue her education at the vocational school. Upon completing her vocational studies, my sister landed a job at a company owned by one of our father's friends. But she left the position after only 3 months, claiming she couldn't show her full potential there. Both my mother and I were perplexed by her rationale, as it seemed unlikely she had grasped every facet of her role in such a short time. Yet, my father took her side again and swiftly arranged another job for her at a different company. Things took a turn when our mother fell ill and was hospitalized. During this time, my sister visited her daily, often missing work. Eventually, she left her job, stating she wanted to focus on caring for our mother. However, her idea of caregiving mainly involved sitting in the same room, chatting occasionally, or being engrossed in her smartphone in the waiting area. In contrast, I found myself managing more practical tasks, like handling our mother's laundry and ensuring she had fresh clothes. While our mother might have appreciated my sister's company initially, her health deteriorated significantly after a month, making conversation difficult. Sadly, within 5 weeks of her condition worsening, she passed away. The shock seemed to paralyze my father and sister, leaving me to organize the funeral arrangements. Thankfully, with the support of our relatives, we managed to honor our mother with a dignified farewell. After our mother's death, my sister moved out to live independently, working part-time. Unable to meet her living expenses, she once again relied on our father, who began covering her rent and utility bills. It seemed that no matter the situation, my father's support for her was unwavering. My sister was using all her earnings from part-time jobs for leisure activities. Whenever she ran out of money, she would turn to our father for financial support. While our mother was strict and had curtailed such dependencies, after her passing, our father became much more lenient, allowing my sister to take as much money as she needed. I initially thought that if both our father and sister were content with this arrangement, there wasn't an issue. However, after I married and moved in with my husband at my parents' house, I discovered that my father wasn't the only one giving her money. My sister had also been approaching my husband for financial help. He found it hard to refuse her requests and even asked her to keep it a secret from me, fearing I might become jealous. My sister's lifestyle, reliant on the funds from our father and my husband, seemed unsustainable, and that proved true when our father fell ill and was hospitalized. Despite our family crisis, my sister didn't visit our father at the hospital. Instead, she began to pressure me for money, claiming she was entitled to continue receiving the financial support our father had provided. "Since I've been getting money from Dad every month, I need you to continue that. The rent and utility bills are still being paid from Dad's account, after all," she said in a demanding tone. This was the first time I heard about the extent of her dependence, and it shocked and angered me. Despite my frustration with her lack of concern for our father's health, I sensed she was struggling. I asked her, "How much are you getting from Dad every month?" And I suggested, "You need to get a job soon and start living on your own earnings." Her response was terse and sullen. "Don't be so annoying," she retorted. This situation highlighted the financial imbalance and dependency issues within our family, and it became clear that something had to change for everyone's sake. My sister proudly declared that she was receiving $1,000 every month from our father, not including her rent. I was taken aback by her audacity and worried that such a hefty sum would discourage her from seeking employment and becoming self-reliant. Initially, I believed our father's hospitalization was temporary and thus saw no harm in continuing his financial support for her. However, his health took a sudden turn for the worse, prompting me to alert our relatives and seek updates from his doctors, who confirmed the gravity of his condition. During this stressful period, I hoped for support from my husband, but he was often too engrossed in his work to visit the hospital. On the rare occasions he did show up, he seemed more interested in discussing potential inheritances than in offering comfort. "The inheritance must be substantial, right? Since it's just you and your sister, you'll split it equally, right?" he asked insensitively. His fixation on the money rather than my father's health disgusted me, confirming the warnings my relatives had given about his materialistic nature. My sister, too, showed her true colors. When I informed her of our father's critical condition, her only concern was whether she would continue to receive her monthly allowance. "Forget about that, just make sure you pay me every month. Without that money, I can't live," she demanded before abruptly ending the call. Her selfishness infuriated me, especially as I faintly heard a male voice in the background during our conversation, which I distressingly recognized. A month later, our father passed away. Neither my sister nor my husband were present in his final moments. Having organized my mother's funeral previously, I knew the immense responsibility involved. Yet again, I was left to handle everything alone. My sister didn't even attend the funeral, and my husband disappeared immediately after the ceremony, claiming he had work commitments. Even the relative who had introduced me to my husband noticed his absence and commented on it at the funeral, asking, "What happened to your husband? It's strange for him to be absent, isn't it?" All I could muster was a bitter smile, a silent acknowledgement of the painful realization that those closest to me were the most distant when it mattered most. After the emotional whirlwind of my father's funeral, I finally had a moment to breathe. However, the calm was short-lived. My husband approached me with a sly grin, his first words hinting at his true concerns. "So, how much did you inherit? Even if it's split, you must have gotten quite a bit, right?" This was exactly the money-centered mindset my relative had cautioned me about before we married. Disheartened yet unsurprised, I responded with calculated indifference, "My sister gets $250 million, and I get nothing." I hadn't actually discussed the inheritance details with my lawyer yet, and with the funeral barely behind us, I hadn't even begun to process my emotions. But seeing my husband so eagerly talk about the inheritance pushed me beyond frustration to near amusement. His reaction was immediate and dramatic. "What? You don't get anything? Then you're no use to me. Let's get a divorce right now." His words echoed the shallow nature of his commitment. Feeling mutual disdain, I shot back, "Let's do that. It's clear you married me for my father's money, didn't you? I'll divorce you." With that, I pulled out the divorce papers I had preemptively prepared, knowing deep down that our marriage could come to this. My husband was taken aback as I handed him the papers, perhaps surprised at my readiness, but he signed them regardless. As he did, he spitefully remarked, "I'll just divorce you, who has no inheritance, and remarry your sister Victoria to get the $250 million. Regardless of his taunts, I promptly filed the divorce papers. I was relieved to free myself from a marriage that had become nothing more than a financial transaction to him. The very next day, it seemed he had moved on and submitted a marriage certificate with my sister, Victoria. A few days later, still under the delusion of the inheritance tale I spun, he called me, shouting over the phone, clinging to his mistaken beliefs. "When are you going to start the inheritance procedures? Give Victoria the $100 million as soon as possible," my ex-husband demanded over the phone. I had been anticipating his call, eager to see how this would unfold, but I certainly didn't want to be the one to reach out first after he had stormed out. In a composed, businesslike tone, I replied, "Let's discuss it at my place this Sunday. I'll have everything ready for the process." Overjoyed, thinking he was on the brink of receiving a fortune, my ex-husband quickly agreed and hung up, his voice brimming with barely contained excitement. However, the real drama was set to unfold over the weekend. My ex-husband and my sister arrived at my parents' house, visibly surprised to find that I had invited a lawyer to join us. My ex-husband, however, tried to mask his surprise with overconfidence, remarking, "I knew it. You need a lawyer to handle such a large inheritance." The lawyer, maintaining a professional demeanor, but with a hint of confusion, addressed my ex-husband, "While there is indeed the matter of inheritance to discuss, there's also a matter of property division claimed by your ex-wife against you." He then presented several photographs of my ex-husband leaving my sister's house, each stamped with a date clearly showing they were taken before our divorce was finalized. "These photographs are evidence of your affair before the divorce proceedings were completed. You will need to comply with the division of property as outlined by these findings," the lawyer explained. Unbeknownst to them, I had overheard my ex-husband discussing the inheritance over the phone with my sister during my father's funeral preparations. Sensing their belief that I was too preoccupied with grief to notice their actions, they had been careless. Their meetings at my sister's house, which they thought were secret, were now coming to light, and I had directed my lawyer to gather evidence of my husband's infidelity. As the truth dawned on my ex-husband and the reality of the situation began to sink in, I watched, a mix of satisfaction and sadness coloring the moment. The inheritance he had so greedily anticipated was entangled in legal stipulations he hadn't foreseen, and his deceit was now laid bare for all to see. At my sister's house nearly every day, my ex-husband's frequent visits provided ample evidence of their affair. Both were visibly shocked when the conversation abruptly shifted from inheritance to their infidelity during the meeting with the lawyer. However, my ex-husband quickly composed himself and dismissively said, "Property division is trivial compared to the $250 million I'm about to inherit. I'll settle that immediately." With arrogance, he signed the documents the lawyer presented, without fully understanding the situation. After he signed, I couldn't help but add, "Enjoy your life with my sister, who, by the way, inherited nothing. Now that you've signed, I'll be sure to enforce the property division agreement." At this revelation, my sister let out a scream of disbelief. "What? Why is my inheritance zero? I'm supposed to get $250 million. My ex-husband, his face turning red with anger and confusion, blurted out, "There's no way. There's no inheritance. I won't let you keep it all." The lawyer, maintaining his calm amidst their outbursts, began to clarify. Victoria was actually her late mother's child from a previous relationship, and was never officially adopted by Riley's late father. There is no legal parent-child relationship between them, and thus, Victoria, you are not eligible to inherit from Riley's father. I added, trying to help my sister understand the family history she might not remember. When our parents remarried, Victoria, you were only about a year old, so it's unlikely you'd recall any of it. I was 4 and vividly remember the joy of gaining a sister. What I never anticipated was that this sister would one day betray me. I continued, our father and mother were each bringing a child into the marriage and tried to balance their affection between us. My mother treated me as her own daughter, and my father cherished my sister, perhaps even more so because she wasn't his biological child and he felt the need to compensate. It's also important to note, I explained further, that although they remarried, my mother, suspected by some relatives of being after my father's assets, chose not to officially adopt Victoria. This was the complex family dynamic that those who suggested my marriage were well aware of. This revelation shook the very foundation of what my sister and ex-husband believed they were entitled to, exposing the complex layers of our family's past and the misaligned expectations that led to this dramatic confrontation. As it turned out, I was the sole person eligible to inherit my father's estate. If my parents had shared biological children, the inheritance might have been more complex. But, as fate would have it, they had none. Sometimes I think they chose not to have children together to sidestep potential disputes over inheritance. This realization hit me only recently, when I understood why my father had been financially supporting my sister even into her adulthood. Similarly, I was never legally adopted by my mother, meaning we weren't recognized as parent and child by law. However, this technicality never mattered to us. We were family in every sense that counted. It became apparent that our parents had not disclosed to my sister that they had both been remarried previously. Today, she was faced with this truth for the first time. Watching my ex-husband's reaction was telling. His face shifted from red to pale, as he grasped not only the absence of the expected inheritance, but also the implications of the property division he had agreed to. Looking bewildered, he asked me, was that story about Victoria getting $100 million, and you getting nothing just a lie? Barely suppressing a chuckle, I replied, of course, it was a lie. It was my way of getting back at you for your affair. And no, my father's estate isn't worth $100 million. Just then, my sister, who had been quiet, burst out, I've done quite a lot of shopping expecting that I would get Dad's inheritance. What's going to happen to the money Dad had been giving me? Will you continue supporting me, sis? Since you're married and have a reliable husband, you don't need it anymore, right? Have Mateo support you. She looked towards my ex-husband, who was still pale from the shock. Shaking his head, he confessed, I can't afford that. I also made purchases expecting the inheritance, and now with the property division, I'm financially stretched too thin. The revelation and the subsequent fallout had left everyone reeling. My sister and ex-husband, both misguided in their expectations, now faced the reality of their financial situations without the safety net they had presumed would be there. The dynamics of our relationships had fundamentally shifted, underscored by the stark truths that were only now coming to light. After that dramatic declaration, my husband suddenly dropped to his knees in front of me, his expression filled with remorse. Riley, I'm sorry, it was all my fault, he pleaded. I apologize. Can we possibly get back together? The lawyer, who had been packing up his briefcase, couldn't help but chuckle at the scene. Where did that arrogant attitude go? He murmured, amused by the drastic change from the man's earlier demeanor. Mateo, now humbled and kneeling, looked utterly ridiculous. Following our intense discussion, my ex-husband and my sister left the house looking thoroughly dejected. It wasn't long before I heard they had divorced. For my ex-husband, who had remarried hastily with the hope of inheriting through my sister, his interest dwindled once it was clear she had no inheritance. He lamented about the upcoming property division and his inability to support my sister financially. Given that my ex-husband possessed no significant assets, I arranged with my lawyer to have the court-mandated payments deducted directly from his monthly salary. My lawyer assured me this was the best way to ensure I received what was owed without delay. My sister, once supported by our father, now found herself working part-time just to make ends meet. Unfortunately, her financial burdens became too great, and she eventually filed for bankruptcy. Soon after, she moved out of her apartment, and I lost track of her whereabouts. It was a sad realization that my father's financial support, while well-intentioned, had inadvertently left her ill-prepared to handle life's financial realities. As I settled back into life in my parents' house alone, some relatives suggested they could introduce me to potential suitors. However, I declined their offers. The experience with my ex-husband had taught me a valuable lesson. This time, I resolved to find a partner on my own terms, someone whose values aligned more closely with my own, without the interference of well-meaning, but ultimately misguided matchmaking.